Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 327. Did Muhammad actually even exist? Now there are some people that have talked to me. When I talk about mystic Islam, I've edited I think one or two works on that subject. Now when I talk about Islam in general, they believe that there was no Muhammad. That actually it's a transmogrified story created later, that the very existence of the individual is a myth. Now, these people tend to be against Islam as a religion, so they're not Muslims. They dislike the religion in some cases, or they have a strong disbelief. I think from a secular perspective, more atheistic, and so they just say, well, it's not real. And a lot of these people, I think, overlap with the Jesus mythology thing, or they are Christians. And it's funny because then they're making the Muhammad mythology, but we won't get too deep into that. On that end, what I would say is this is historically speaking. When we look at Islam, if you don't believe in it, the more easy way to describe that would be, hey, the story makes no sense, these tales of Allah and these various goings-on are superstition, and, they just don't make any sense. You don't have to render a potentially historical character to a history, much like with Jesus. Of course, I'm not a Christian. I spur an organized religion, although I don't care if people believe in Jesus as their Lord and Savior or something. I would be against churches in general. Some small little independent chapel, a little bit better maybe than a mega church, but it's still peddling a certain dogma, ideology, claiming to be wise, but is a fool in many cases. That's a lot of priests, rabbis, and imams and stuff. A lot of pagan ministers too, trust me, and so forth. But here's the thing. When you compare this to the story of Jesus, when you're looking at the historicity of Jesus, you don't have any writings or meanderings into Jesus existing until Tacitus. It doesn't come for decades thereafter. This would have been a period in which most of the people, if Jesus existed, most of the people that were old enough to remember seeing him would have been dead by then because of the short lifespan in general at the time. The next major mentions come from a decade later. So we're talking about a period in which the people that were already adults in the 30s AD would have been in their late 50s through their 60s and 70s. Half of them at least would have been dead or demented by them. Back then, they were drinking wine that was boiled in lead pots to make it sweeter. So there were some health issues, although the Romans did have very, very good teeth because they didn't have much sugar intake. Except for the nobility, they were often quite toothless. We should learn a lesson about dental science from the ancient Romans. Stop eating so much goddamn refined sugar. Put the honey away and get yourself some whole grain oats or something. With Muhammad, it's not the same. With Muhammad, we have roughly contemporary accounts of this particular individual, and the geography and political climate differs as well. So with Jesus, if you're making that comparison, I'm not saying Jesus didn't exist or was Apollonius or anything, but there's a speculation of that. The speculation is similar. Well, this person didn't exist. This is all horseshit, basically. With Jesus, you have a chaotic political climate, where in the first century in the Roman Empire and Judea, you're having rebellions and subversive plots and all sorts of suppression and oppression on every level. It was very volatile in that region. Within Muhammad's area, again assuming he existed, in the era of early Islam, there was tribal warfare going on, but Muhammad's people won. They wiped out or subjugated these outside groups. When you're looking, therefore, at early Christianity, which was subject to Rome, it had been subjugated. The Jews and the Christians there were oppressed in the early stage, the Essenes and all these other groups, the Gnostics. They were oppressed and indeed slaughtered. The Muslims were not. So the chaos factor was different. And in one sense, you're the agent of chaos. You're the one subjugating people. In the other sense, in Rome, you're the ones that have been subjugated. It's also a bit more contemporary in the sense of simply Islam comes much later, many centuries after Christendom arises in the Roman Empire. You then have, as well, not long after the formation, certainly, of the doctrinal church, the more organized religion of Christianity that's talking about Jesus and collecting these fragments that are supposedly about him. You have the collapse of the western side of the Roman Empire and barbarians and craziness going on. With Islam, you certainly have plenty of wars and the area changes hands numerous times, but not for some time thereafter, not for quite some time. Up until then, at least internally, there was stability. Also, when we're talking about gospel accounts of Jesus, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, John, Luke, you're talking about claims of being contemporary to Jesus, but we don't necessarily know that that's the case. But we do know that at least in the more academic writings, I'm not talking about the Quran, I'm talking about the material about the Quran, roughly contemporary to the decades thereafter, we have stories that you wouldn't expect necessarily to be associated with the compiling of the Quran in its correct form and stuff, if it were being invented. For instance, there's one passage, I believe it's in the Sahih Muslim, might be the Sahih Bukhari. These are the hadiths. You should look them up. By the way, there's plenty of stuff in there to attack on a moral basis, especially the Sahih Bukhari, so have fun. Some of Muhammad's words, according to some of the people that claim to have known him, including his brother and his wife, were bizarre. Let's put it that way. You look into it. It's a good read. Supposedly, some pages of the original Quran, as transcribed, were eaten by Aisha's goat. And this is considered a more or less doctrinal approach to Islam, to what became the Quran, among Sunni Muslims, among the Wahhabi and I believe Salafi and certain other groups. Now, you don't have, as far as I know, anything roughly equivalent to that in the Gospels. It's just not there. You also, there's the other point with regards to the religions when we're talking about historicity. With Christianity, we don't get a full-on compilation for 3 centuries beyond the Jewish works that had been compiled, the 5 first books of the Old Testament, essentially. We don't have anything comparable to a doctrine that's been actually codified. People within Islam, not long after, you have the Quran, and it's in its finalized form. Now, there are analytical disagreements over what really should be there, and especially interpretations of what's written. But you don't have something like with Christianity, where for several centuries you have dozens of disparate Christian groups with their own Bibles. They consider different works to be codified. None of these people that made the final decisions on those codices were contemporary to Jesus, nor is there any claim that they were. They come from like the 2nd and 3rd century. With Muhammad and with Islam, these are people that compile it very early with a claim to contemporary status. We don't have anything comparable within Christianity to actually document. It's not even claimed by Christians. They're like, oh, well, this happens to be the Bible, and there are dozens of different versions, by the way, of that. There's the Apocrypha. There's apocryphal material technically within Islam, and there are all sorts of semi-canonical and more or less canonical works explaining elements of Islam and explaining history, and here's how the Quran was made, and all of these other things. My opinion is that Muhammad was a historical figure, based on, again, the evidence that the contemporary nature of people's claims with regards to his life, which in some cases they cross-checked with different people who were aware of him and contemporary to him to try to corroborate. An attempt was made to corroborate material, and really the Muslims did a more rigorous job in the early stages than the Christians, because the Christians didn't have an organized movement for several centuries. So therein lies the difference. When we're talking about Jesus, we're talking about a hodgepodge of different claims, analyses, and different books, and different possible dates and philosophies and everything else. Was Jesus divine? Was he semi-divine? Was he an advanced philosopher? Is he a hellbound crazy man? In early Christianity, the level of organization was different because it was an underground group, a subversive group, a persecuted group. Not like with Islam, where Muhammad has subjugated the surrounding area and taken over Mecca and Medina, and the general region is, there's still war going on and conflict, as there was everywhere in the world at the time, but it wasn't on the same level. The Muslims were the dominant ones within their scope. They weren't the suppressed minority that had to hide from the authorities and live on the out edges of society. And so they were able to sit down and codify the material, talk to one another very quickly, and organize what became their opinions about what Muhammad said. So yes, I would say Muhammad almost certainly existed. Jury's still out on Jesus. Probably there's definitely a central figure there. I don't deny that. I'm just saying some people think it was based on Apollonius or some other philosopher roughly contemporary to the period. Doesn't really matter, though, because, again, all of the analysis of that comes from long, long after. You don't even have really an attempt for a couple of centuries to codify what became a Bible in any sense. A lot of the early people were of the opinion the Revelation of St. John shouldn't be in there. It should only have one gospel. It should only be the Gospels. Maybe Paul should be alongside Luke and everything else sort of doesn't matter. Should the Old Testament even be included? It's Jewish stuff. It has nothing to do with what Jesus is teaching. Now, these two books contravene one another. Which should be used? I'll just put them both in and reanalyze one of them. Translate it a little bit different so it makes more sense. Again, while you have a lot of debate and analysis of Islam, you don't have that kind of historical situation. That's about all. Peace out.